Next up, we have Leanna. How did your lived experience lead you to explore accessible design?
Yeah, I got a random virus when I was a toddler, which has left me with some residual paralysis, which means that when I was going through the school system, my mom and my whole family and myself, obviously, had to think a fair amount about the accessibility of the built environment. Like, how was I going to get from class to class in a reasonable passing time? How was I going to manage pain and fatigue such that I could still participate in all of my classes? So there were a lot of conversations around what kinds of built environments would fit my body and my needs. And as I grew older, I realized just how much we can affect as peoples and members of a community. I realized the ways in which we can share our voices to affect change. Um, like Olenka was saying, the ADA gets you somewhere, but it doesn't get you all the way there. Um, so there are a lot of fun ways that we can advocate for increasing accessible design.
Thank you very much. And Andrea, how did your lived experience lead you to explore accessible design?
Um, Similar to Leanna's experience, my lived experience as growing up with a disability really made me think that I could use my experience to try to make things a little better for others. And I really, at that time, I needed that kind of purpose. So that's how my journey started in architecture. I studied architecture in school, and then I found that consulting with architects was actually a more effective way to advocate for change. So that's what I've been doing since 2011. So.
Thank you so much. And Becky, how did your lived experience lead you to explore accessible design?
So my first time where I really started needing to think about it and really was with family members. I have several family members with a number of different disabilities. And when my niece was born, and she'll be 30 this year, we really started to realize that there were a lot of limitations in what the family could do, places that we could go, as was mentioned, playgrounds and that whatnot. And then I was diagnosed with some issues that impacted my mobility 20 years ago, and had then to deal with some additional personal firsthand experiences of not being able to get into places, literally not being able to do things because they piled a bunch of stuff in front of the doorway that was the only doorway that I could get in. Or I typically use, when I motor around, I've got two different mobility scooters, and they're larger than a manual wheelchair. And so sometimes the places where I'm trying to go are really tailored to the minimum ADA requirements. And if I was in a really skinny manual wheelchair, I might have been able to scrape through there, but there was no way I could get in there. And then just dealing with walking, I can't walk very far, stand very far. And so dealing with just the functional ability of getting around my home, getting up and down stairs and that type of thing. So I've got a lot of, a couple of decades worth of just experience with my family, and then our circle, our network, our just how all of our friends and family and um, their daily experiences and understandings of how they're going through. really just opened my eyes to the fact that we are designing our communities and our spaces for a certain type of mobile, tall person, and that there are other ways of doing things that will accommodate a lot more people. And if we look at universal design and universal design principles, then we can accommodate a lot more people. And so that's really what I've been exploring and working through. But it really has been eye-opening just to see what my family and friends and myself have had to go through in our daily life, and people don't have to think about it. And then in my network, people not being able to go to the community center because there's no adult changing table, or those types of things. So lots of learned experiences from me and people I know, and then my wider community conversations that we've been having the last, number of years. It has really brought more and more of those to light, and things for us to think about of ways that we can do better and not make the lives difficult for people who are already dealing with a lot of other difficulties.
Great, thank you all. Next question, what design changes did you advocate for, and how has your advocacy made a difference? Olenka, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yeah, so gosh, this again is the conversation that revolves around the public playgrounds. And I will refresh the audience's memory in terms of we as a group did not have experience in playgrounds. Again, we were just a group of parents and volunteers that knew we could do better. Just quickly, what we looked for examples online and around the world of playgrounds that we all felt could show what is possible if you consider the needs for everyone. And because we, to this day, have not found any such public playgrounds, we actually advocated for and created a playground in Palo Alto 10 years ago that not only advocated for change, but showed by example what happens when you do create a design that incorporates the needs of sensory seekers and sensory avoiders, or the family with older adults, or our very large and growing population of families that have somebody with autism. And so the Magical Bridge is an embodiment, if you will, of not only the advocacy to change, but to just make people aware that there are so many in our community that we don't see because there are not places for them that have been thoughtfully designed. And of course, you all know that when you have a member of your family that has a disability, it affects the whole family. It affects where you go and what you do. And so we believe the playground is a great first outdoor classroom. It's also a good way for people to know and meet who is in their community, which is why we believe that's a very powerful place to start in the advocacy journey of this kind of work. And I have a lot of different kind of stories I could share with the group, but I want to be conscious of the fact that there's other panelists. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Leanna, same question. What design changes did you advocate for, and how has your advocacy made a difference?
One of my favorite projects that I've worked on was while I was still in therapy school. I helped with doing a needs assessment for a fully accessible water park. This is the Spirit of Discovery Park. It's still being built out in St. Louis. And the goal of this park was to make something that would be fully physically accessible, cognitively accessible, sensorially accessible, and emotionally accessible. And so it had to look at all of the different access needs of these different communities and kind of negotiate between things that are maybe inaccessible for one group, but accessible for another. and vice versa. So there was a lot of conversation about how do we find kind of a middle zone? How do we find what will support the most number of people? Which was hard to think about, okay, this person's going to be an outlier, this kind of person is going to be an outlier for this design. So how can we find ways to support them in some areas of the park, but they might not be fully supported in other aspects of the park? So those conversations were tricky, but ultimately, I think we came up with a pretty good design in terms of having your sensory zones for your sensory seekers, your sensory zones for your sensory avoiders, tactile aspects, ways in which wheelchair users or mobility device users could access different features of the park. I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited to see how people end up interacting with aspects of the park.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrea. What design changes did you advocate for, and how has your advocacy made a difference?
So at Studio Pacifica, we often say that you can't necessarily see when our job is done right. Accessible elements are not always visible, and they shouldn't always call attention to themselves. It should just be great design. So there are projects all over Seattle and in other cities too where we have worked that there are elements that are more accessible than the ADA. We like to say that the ADA standards are the basement. They're just the minimum, and we're always advocating for doing better than that. So I'm not sure that I could put my finger and point at one specific thing because we're really trying to support our clients and educate them to make better design choices. So at the end of the day, they get the credit, but we know in our hearts, I helped to do that. So that's kind of how I see our work.
Thank you very much. And Becky, what design changes did you advocate for, and how has your advocacy made a difference?
I've been working on a number of things specifically for the past 5 or 6 years about our communities, right? Community design in a lot of different ways. So, for instance, at the Microsoft main campus in Redmond, there are over 200 adults with developmental disabilities at that campus. And the city has had a goal for a long time of putting housing near jobs, but the housing for those workers are not necessarily available in our community. And how do we get more housing for them? And so putting that in the works of incentivizing and offering developer incentives to get that housing and accessible housing in general, making rules for those units to be more accessible, more transitional, so that it can be easily converted to accessible units. Also, how we design our streets, our sidewalks, lighting, all of those things we've been working through. Signage, we're going to be doing an inclusive wayfinding signage program. We're just adopting some new codes. They're changing how you design buildings how we design parking garages so that we can get accessible vans into those parking garages. So lots of different things filtered through the lens of our community's direct requests. Like the parking garage request was a direct comment from one of our community members who uses a modified van and can't use any of the parking garages that are currently in Redmond because he can't actually open his door inside the garage because it's too short. There's not enough clearance. So, well, lots and lots of different code updates. We also adopted a lot of policy regulations with our comprehensive plan update last year, emphasizing inclusion and inclusive design and universal design in particular, how we prioritize our community members of all ages and abilities and cultures and sexes and just being aware of the choices that we make in our design standards, our minimum qualifications. We've also agreed, as Andrea said, that the ADA standards is the bare minimum that does not meet the needs of many folks in our community. I have also been working for the last several years with the Northwest Universal Design Council, and we've done a number of events on how to get other cities and in our region and around the state to look at their minimum qualifications for affordable housing and construction of their communities. And so I've been working with a number of those events and agencies, including there's a state standard called the Evergreen Standards that all affordable housing is required to comply with, and there's an optional universal design credit that you can go for, and we're starting some conversations to potentially redo that and make it more specific and make it more impactful and potentially maybe even make it required and not optional. So I've been working on a lot of these things. It's really exciting to see them getting adopted and moving into place. And we've got our very first project with IDD, or intellectual and developmental disability specific housing, is actually under construction right now. So definitely been a number of years of conversations and work, but we're actually starting to see some of that play out in our community. So very exciting.
That is exciting, and thank you all. Next question, how else did you notice inaccessible design flaws? Olenka?
Thank you. Well, the reality is they're everywhere. And I want to echo what the panelists have been saying, which is, again, with tremendous gratitude and appreciation to the many that fought hard for the ADA. Unfortunately, we do need to do much better. And sadly, until it becomes a legal mandate, a lot of people are not incorporating what we consider to be just thoughtful design. And when we start to think about what's accessible or inaccessible, one of the words that I actually don't like very much is inclusive and accessible are the two words because they're really misrepresented. Many people think, oh, well, we have one of those inclusive parks or one of those accessible spaces. I mean, the reality is inclusive means everyone. We all want to be included. We all want to do more than just access a space or a program. So I mean, it really is amazing to me as my kind of conversation focuses playgrounds. There is $9 billion plus of money that, in my view, is really squandered by our cities through poor design of these spaces that could be a beautiful place for community to come together. So just examples, I'll just give you 3 examples that come top of mind of what makes a public playground fully compliant to law, but woefully inaccessible to everyone and not welcoming to our users who have autism and other disabilities. But just the general surfacing when you go to public playgrounds, you see all that tan bark That is compliant to law. It is not accessible to anybody, including wheelchair users. When you go to public playgrounds, you may notice that they are two structures. They're two-level structures. Do you ever wonder how that even complies with ADA law for a wheelchair user? And if you ever go look, you'll see there's a transfer platform at the bottom of the stairs. And what the law expects people to do that are wheelchair visitors is transfer off of their wheelchairs, sit on that ledge on the bottom of the stairs, and pull themselves up with their arms to the top. And you know how uncomfortable that must be. But on top of that, we know that a fraction of our disability friends are wheelchair users, but our public playgrounds don't consider the needs of somebody with autism. Most playgrounds are not fenced in, and we know many are elopers. And so those also playgrounds are dangerous for many families who don't go because it's so close to a public street. But guess who else runs off the playground? Little kids, toddlers, right? So we're always talking about when you design for the margins, you design for everybody, as the panelists have said earlier. So it really astounds us that it doesn't need to cost more money. It's just more thoughtful design. And when you design for everyone, you really show that the community matters and you set the tone for the community. So I invite anybody that is listening, and as we consider spaces and public projects, I'm very excited to learn about the Spirit of the Disability Discovery Park in St. Louis. I'll be looking into that. But we need more of those examples in every community, how to design for everyone. So flaws are all around us, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. And Leanna, how else did you notice inaccessible design flaws?
So in my work life, coming here at Disability Empowerment Center, Becky has heard this story already, so I apologize for a repeat. When I first moved into our Redmond office, it was a brand new building. It's an incredible design in that the bottom floor is all social service organizations, and the top 5 floors are subsidized housing. And so people who live upstairs can come down and get resources very easily. We're very close to several bus lines. Accessibility was really thought through in the design of this building. However, I was carrying all my stuff in, and I noticed that the front door didn't have a push button to open up the door. And I was like, this is kind of strange. I make my way into the building after, yanking the door open, trying to run my body through the door before it closes on me. And I get inside and I'm talking to the executive director, and I'm like, hey, I know the building is still being finished. Is there plans to put a push button at the front door? And she was like, I could have sworn that we were going to get a push button at the front door. Turns out, according to the building codes at that time, you only need an accessible push button to get to the housing component of a public building. So the ADA is not going far enough. Another aspect that we've been in communication about is kind of related to visual and also cognitive disabilities. The signage to be able to find aspects of the building is hard to navigate, hard to understand. And so we've been in communication on how to make things more visible, more able to be comprehended by people who might not have English as their first language, might be new to the area, unfamiliar with how things are laid out. It's a pretty big building. It's 3 buildings all on one big campus. People oftentimes are unable to find parking because the sign for the underground free parking is partially obscured by a tree. However, the tree is really important for shade, temperature regulation, just general beauty of the space. And so it's a lot of conversations about how do we make this usable for as many people as possible. Something that I just want to give a plug for folks who are listening. The Department of Energy is actually trying to remove some aspects of Section 504 at this moment, namely things that they say are costly. And so that might impact some of the incentives for buildings to be more accessible and inclusive. Do a little Googling, share your thoughts, especially based off of things that you've learned here. We need the world to be more accessible.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrea. How else did you notice inaccessible design flaws?
Yeah, so I'm also a certified ADA coordinator, which has meant that I've spent a lot of time studying the complexities of the ADA and learning about the different compromises within the ADA standards. The areas that are not strong enough, like the requirements for accessibility in workplaces, they're very minimal. So I think as I've gained experience in different facets of experience in my life, I'm realizing that there are more inaccessible design flaws than I had thought, and that the ADA has so much further to go.
And lastly, Becky, how else did you notice inaccessible design flaws?
For me, a couple of different ways. In one of my past jobs at Scottsdale, Arizona, I was the city's ADA coordinator as a third or fourth hat on top of my job for about 3 years. And so I learned a lot in that role, but also I have spent a lot of time talking to the community, having specific phone calls, having focus groups, having events where I feed people and come talk to me, share with me what your challenges are. Is there something I can do about it, or can I give that information to somebody else and make connections? I had somebody tell me after a major storm event, 5 years ago, they plowed the streets and they put all the snow at blocked me in my house. And I'm not normally housebound, but now I am. And I can't get to the grocery store. And so just all of those shared experiences have been very intentional for me, to help learn more about things that I don't have personal experiences with, but that I might be able to get that information to another department or another agency and help provide a connection. There's a lot of things that I know I don't know, and there's a lot of things that I don't personally experience. But my job has been to try to find out what I don't know that I don't know, and to involve the people who typically aren't involved in city processes, planning processes. And then having the flip side of that is training the staff that I work with to be aware of those questions and to also ask those questions. So it's been a lot of conversations.
Thank you all. And the last question, starting with Olenka first. Building off on the ADA's impact, how can design be more accessible?
Well, I think that we've all been saying similar things related to our experiences and our work. And, um, it is a very complicated situation when you are creating for everybody. As we've said, you're creating for the sensory seekers, you're creating for the sensory avoiders, you're thinking about how to make it really welcoming for everyone without feeling so sterile that people will not come because it's so accessible that it's not interesting or fun and so on. So I think that with each of the projects, each of the work that we all do, we show ways to be as inclusive as possible. And so for our view, accessible is sort of the minimum standard, right? What we really want to be aiming for is inclusive and welcoming to everyone, because access is just access. I mean, we want to do far more than that. And I think as we create our playground, certainly we are trying very hard to advocate and explain to cities and groups we work with that, the ADA law we appreciate it, but it really needs to go beyond that. So we show by example that our playgrounds go way beyond ADA law and are as inclusive as possible. And they also are the most attended playgrounds. We've opened our 10th one, and we typically see about 20,000 guests every month, which is easily, 50 times busier than the average public playground. So we're showing that if you create for everybody, not only does it serve the community that lives here, but it also is good for business and it's good for the economy. So I think until we don't want to strong arm anybody into doing anything, so it's not done with the right intention, but I think by showing ways that when we design for everyone, everyone benefits. And guess what? We're designing for the bodies we live in today and the bodies that we will be growing old in, right? So many of these designs benefit everyone, as we know, but our job, I think, is those on the inside need to be to take our work and make it clear and normalized whenever possible. So that's what we're doing with Magical Bridge, and we invite you to come play with us and see what you think.
And Leanna, building off the ADA's impact, how can design be more accessible?
I want to jump off of something that Beckye just actually sent in the chat. At Disability Empowerment Center, we got asked to collaborate with the City of Redmond in designing their comprehensive plan for 2050. It's been really eye-opening to see the ways in which you can take your lived experiences, advocate for a change, and see it implemented in the city's building codes, design standards, ways that they are going to be moving and building in the future. And so I highly recommend anyone who's listening who is passionate about this. There are many different avenues through which you can share your voice and share your experiences. One of the most impactful one is to start small and local. Find whoever is doing accessibility in your city or your area and ask them, okay, how can I share my experiences to make this space work better for me, for my family, for my community? Your lived experiences are some of the most important things that you can share. Bring them to the table.
And now, Andrea, building off the ADA's impact, how can design be more accessible?
There are so many answers and different aspects to consider that this is kind of hard to just narrow it down. I would say that there needs to be more disabled people in design. So starting in school, students with disabilities need to be encouraged to work in design, and that certainly programs need to be more accessible. there's no actual requirement for architects to have any knowledge about the ADA standards before they become architects. So you get buildings like the Hunts Point Library in Queens, New York, that it has some notoriously inaccessible features, and mistakes like that happen because architects don't have to know the ADA standards. There's no requirement that they even work with an accessibility consultant. So there are little things like that. Having the right people at the table making decisions about designs. There needs to be disabled people in the room. We love advocates, but when it's not your own personal experience, it's so easy to forget something, which we see over and over. So that's why one reason why education is so important to us. We want to really help educate our clients and get the right people in the room.
Very much so. And finally, Beckye. Building off the ADA's impact, how can design be more accessible?
One of the things that we've been looking at is the newer modern mobility devices and what their sizes are and what their radiuses are and all of those things, and just trying to better understand that and how that changes how we design our cities and engineer our cities. So that was something that was really important. But I want to piggyback on a couple of things that were already said. Is I would encourage people to get involved in their own community. A lot of times we get frequent report a problem requests. So if, hey, there's a particular sidewalk issue or something, but oftentimes what is really needed is connections to people who are doing projects or on community advisory committees and all of those things. And I know that those are super vital and very hard to time commit or access. But we try to build relationships in the community well ahead of those projects so that we can connect with them when we do need very specific advice. And so I would encourage you to reach out and see what you can do. There are temporary advisory committees, and there's also like planning commissions and park commissions and arts and culture commissions. There's also the KCDC is a great connection, but there's also the Northwest Universal Design Council and their work, like I said, to change the evergreen standards and just bring universal design to a wider audience and just get a better understanding of that. The ADA is the bare minimum, universal design it is a little bit better than that. Inclusive design that goes even further, that talks about everything all at once, designing for everybody, including children and seniors and all of that. It goes further. So just being involved in those larger groups, I think has really been helpful to me, and I would encourage those who haven't connected with them to do so. It's oftentimes really hard to break out of our world because we're struggling with so many other things. But if even you could put in a couple of hours a month to have a couple of conversations and attend a couple of Zoom meetings, it is invaluable to build those relationships and to provide that feedback, because it allows folks like me in places that don't normally deal with, and planning and city planning in general does not normally deal with this. It brings to light things that people don't think about, and has conversations that people, once they start thinking about them and talk about them, they go, oh yeah, that is important. We need to do that. But without that conversation, the folks who don't normally interact in that world, it just doesn't occur to them at all. So I think those conversations are how we get action moving, and in cities in particular, it's getting those conversations moving in a way that eventually makes it down into those things that are adopted. Like, we have design standards for curbs and sidewalks, and we have corner standards, and some of them don't work. And so how do we re-engineer those? And some of those conversations take years, and because they have to put into budgets. And so please do advocate and have those conversations, because some of this work takes a long time to actually make it on the ground. But we have to have that raising of awareness, because most people don't think about it in their day-to-day job.
Thank you all very much. And I just want to remind people that there is a Q&A tab for audience questions. If you have a question for the panelists, please post it in the Q&A tab, and then we can ask them. In the meantime, I have one other question for the panelists. Well, two, but I'll start with this. This is for all panelists. In early 2025, the city of Seattle opened the Overlook Walk, which is a new elevated pathway that connects Pike Place Market to the Seattle waterfront. Upon opening, the Overlook Walk received backlash for placing stairs where they could have placed ramps, with only the ADA accessible way down being an elevator. This design flaw is notable because the whole point of the Overlook Walk is for Seattle tourists and locals to keep an eye on a really good view of Elliott Bay as they commute from Pike Place to the waterfront. However, since some people with disabilities need to use the elevator because there are stairs instead of ramps, they would not be able to enjoy the view in the same way people without disabilities can. How can this design flaw act as an opportunity for construction companies that work on future projects like the Seattle's Overlook Walk to brainstorm ways in which they could avoid repeating that mistake? Starting with Olenka.
Well, gosh, I was just going to put in the chat. I don't live in Seattle, but that is very frustrating because it is an unthoughtful design, and certainly the funding would have been the same, right? If they created the ramps. And who else is left out? I mean, it's not just people with disabilities. What about if you're a parent that's got your stroller with you and you also want to be up there with the family? I mean, I have to say, I am astounded that we are still having these kinds of basic conversations, and I am also amazed that designers and city planners are not thinking along these lines. I mean, we really need to do better, and I think that we need to let I guess, the communities that are doing the work know. I mean, it isn't. I mean, it is for people with disabilities. It's a large group of us, but it's just better design. I think one of the panelists said earlier, maybe it was you, it really isn't. It's disability justice. It's just human justice. It's just the right way to do things. And so we have to keep at it and make it clear that it's for the general public, a better design when you design for everyone. So I'm not there and I haven't seen it, but I've seen it done all over in most public spaces and places that there's a lot of things wrong with their designs, unfortunately.
All right, thank you for that. Leanna, I was wondering if you could answer, How could this design flaw act as an opportunity for construction companies that work on future projects like the Seattle Overlook Walk to brainstorm ways in which they can avoid repeating this mistake?
I really see this as an example of accessibility versus inclusion, where if there had been ramps put in, integrated into the design, then people are included. They're able to utilize the space like anybody else. With the elevators, it's accessible, but you have to find a separate way to find the elevators. I've heard that they're not well marked. It's difficult to find. People feel like a second-class citizen, and that's ultimately not what we want in our downtown areas. One of the main ways that I could see this changing, hopefully in the future, is if builders or city planners contact key stakeholders or put out a call for key stakeholders to show up. I'm using the word key stakeholders here as the people who will use the space, which is one of the things that I've really appreciated about the city of Redmond in their planning is they did make a very intentional call to bring in key stakeholders and make the comment times accessible to people so that they weren't at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when everybody's at work. They weren't at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday when people are trying to put their kids to sleep. So hopefully in the future, architects and builders will think about who is going to be using this space. We want it to be visually beautiful, and also we want it to be fully accessible to anybody and everybody. Strollers, people using guide dogs, people using wheelchairs. I would hope that our future public spaces have more universal thoughts put into them.
Thank you. And Andrea. I'm sorry. Yes, Andrea. How could the design flaw act as an opportunity for construction companies that work on future projects like Seattle's Overlook Walk to brainstorm ways in which they could avoid repeating this mistake?
Yeah, so I just joined the Friends of Waterfront Park Accessibility Advisory Committee. So we've been having a lot of discussions about this this particular issue. I think it really comes back to there weren't people with disabilities in decision-making power within the room. So I feel like this was easily an overlooked thing. And the really frustrating thing is that the elevator that they have out there, one of them does have a glass enclosure, but the elevator cab is like a solid metal box, basically. So there was even a second opportunity to try to make things a little more visually appealing, and they completely missed that one too. And I think it's really just because they didn't have the right people at the table to point out that. So I really just encourage incorporating other experiences when you're putting together a team, like a design team, especially for a civic project.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that too. I think obviously it was a failure on the contractor side, but it was also a failure on the city side, and advocating for all city projects, wherever city you're working in, to have that early consultation. That issue could have been solved super early at the design idea generating phase. Sketching out ideas phase could have nixed that idea and improved it a lot. I also kind of have to laugh because in some ways it gives us an opportunity to show people what not to do. And I would almost love to have that opportunity to send people who might be doing projects for cities to that location and put them in different situations. You have to use this mobility device, you have to use a cane, you have to use whatever it might be. Or here you've got a stroller with a whole bunch of shopping bags, navigate this space and have them do it and learn firsthand. It gives that almost that maze, go through the maze, learn firsthand ability by having that type of a project there. But I do think, as others have mentioned early on, participation would be super helpful. Also, maybe advocating with the cities that for all city projects in their request for proposal process, their RFP that goes out to the consultants, having that in that statement as part of the scope from the very, very beginning, that it has to have the universal design principles incorporated, and it has to involve stakeholders with different levels of, all ages and all abilities. If we can get those conversations started at the very, very, very beginning of these types of projects, they can be very, very easily avoided with no cost associations. It's just a part of the development of the design thought process.
Thank you all for answering that. And then before I continue, I want to invite the audience to ask questions in the Q&A tab, or if it's easier for you, you can just post them in the chat and we'll see and ask the panelists your questions. And I do have one question for Olenka from Colin. The Magical Bridge Foundation and its playground came to be before the Magical Bridge was built. There were no playgrounds in the Bay Area that accommodated disability that your daughter has, and you wanted there to be a playground that both of your daughters could play on together. Can you elaborate more about what the accessibility problems Bay Area playgrounds had before the arrival of Magical Bridge was like, and how Magical Bridge's playgrounds aim to solve these problems?
Oh, thank you, Colin, for the question. Well, I mean, unfortunately, it isn't just Bay Area, but it's actually global. And as I've been alluding to and I actually put it in the chat for anybody interested. We've had so many opportunities to answer the question, how Magical Bridge is different from a typical ADA compliant playground. Remember, all of today's playgrounds, whether they're school playgrounds or public playgrounds, really aim for that ADA checklist compliancy. And of course, we all agree that's not enough, but people always want to know, well, how is that not enough? Well, there are so many points. The first thing is the typical playgrounds are made for children. As we know, many adults benefit from movement. Many people with disabilities are not the same age physically as they are developmentally. There are physical limitations that we all need for our brain development, which are not available in most public parks. The structures that you see in parks and also at schools, that's really very unwelcoming to somebody with autism, the unpredictability and the chaos of everybody running all over the place, lack of places to retreat from the noise. The sensory is missing in today's playgrounds. The surfacing is not welcoming to a wheelchair user and many other people with mobility devices. The plastics are, aesthetically unattractive, but also can cause issues with cochlear implants, with slides. The shade, the lack of, movement for people with varying physical abilities and disabilities. I mean, the reality is you want as a person to be included in every experience that you can be, and those playgrounds are that first place as a family where if you have someone, if you are someone with a disability, you immediately notice, well, I wasn't considered in this design, I'm not welcome here. So Colin, your question is a great one, which is, yes, what are the differences? There's so many of them, and again, it's like this Seattle overlook way. It's one thing to create with design from the ground up in mind, like many people we come across in the playground world, they'll put in an accessible element into the playground. Well, that's not very good, right? I mean, you need to have the whole space designed from the layout to the materials to the shade to everything else. So we really need more of that. And it's thanks to people like you and this group that we need to keep reminding everyone that we need to create the community spaces and places that reflect members of the community. So I'm happy to, of course, keep going, but I need to stop so others can answer their questions. Thank you for that, though.
Thank you very much. If anybody else has questions, please post them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I am posting the link to Redmond's Inclusive Design. That is the website that both Beckye and Leanna mentioned. And if there's no other questions, I'm going to post another link for you all. Before we adjourn, I would like to invite everyone who attended today to please take a moment to provide us some feedback. You can either access a quick survey via the QR code in the PowerPoint or via the link that I just posted in the chat. It should take you less than 5 minutes to answer the survey, and it would be very helpful for us, so thank you.
This is Kimberly again, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, this event was recorded and you can view the video later at Disability Empowerment Center's YouTube channel. Our July webinar will be about ableism and education and take place on July 15th. And thanks again and have a great rest of your day.